My friend called me crying. "They just fined me," she said, "because you did the work." And that was the first time I realized I'd somehow pissed off an HOA I didn't even live in. You ever have one of those weekends where everything finally goes right for once? That's what this was supposed to be. Just me, some stone pavers, a little sweat, and a good deed for a friend who deserved a break. Her name's Erin. We've known each other since way back, college years. She's one of those people who just never catches a damn break, you know? Works full-time as a nurse, solo mom, juggling school stuff for her son, mortgage, HOA fees, everything. And still somehow manages to be the kind of person who remembers your birthday and sends you cookies in the mail like it's nothing. I'd take a bullet for her, no hesitation. She bought the house 2 years ago. Nice place. Suburban, clean. A little too clean, if I'm being honest. You know those neighborhoods where all the grass looks like it was photoshopped in? One of those. She got it because the schools were good and it had this little yard where her son, Trevor, could play without ending up in the street. But the front walkway? That thing was a death trap. Just this sad, broken gravel path that got muddy every time it so much as thought about raining. She'd mentioned it a couple times in passing. I really gotta fix that. But she never got around to it. Between shifts, bills, and being mom, it just wasn't happening. So I offered to help. No big deal. Told her, let's knock it out this weekend. I'll bring the tools, we'll get some stone, make it look nice. Your ankles will thank you. She kinda laughed it off at first, like she didn't want to be a burden. That's Erin for you. Would rather limp on a twisted foot than inconvenience anyone. But I insisted, and once I showed up with the pavers in the back of my truck, she didn't argue. It was actually a fun day. We spent the afternoon talking trash, playing old music from her college playlists, and working in the sun. Trevor came out and helped for a bit, mostly by carrying tools that didn't need to be carried and asking too many questions, but he was into it. We even got her neighbor, this older guy named Jerry, to come over and lend a hand for a minute. Said he liked seeing people do it themselves for once, instead of paying someone 3 arms and a kidney. By the end of the day, the front yard looked better than half the houses on that block. It wasn't just functional, it looked damn good. I used high-grade slate, edged it properly, filled the joints with polymeric sand so it wouldn't shift. Took us maybe 6 hours and about $500 in material. Honestly, I could have charged $2,500 for it easy if this was a client. But it wasn't. It was Erin. And that walkway wasn't just a patch of stone, it was me giving her something solid to step on, literally and otherwise. She thanked me 3 times. Made us dinner, poured a couple glasses of wine after Trevor went to bed, and said it felt like her house finally looked like someone actually lived there. I remember that line. It finally looks like mine. It felt good, one of those rare moments where you actually feel like you did something that mattered. Which is why the next day when she called crying, I thought something really awful had happened, like someone got hurt. I never would have guessed it was a goddamn HOA fine. $100 for unauthorized work on her front walkway, and that was just the beginning. At first, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake, like maybe someone fat-fingered the wrong address into some HOA form, or maybe there was a rule buried in fine print Erin didn't see when she bought the place. You know how those associations are, pages and pages of nonsense about mailbox height and what color mulch your soul must be made of. But nope, it wasn't a mistake. When Erin forwarded me the letter, it was clear as day. Unauthorized structural modification to front landscape area. Fine, $100, immediate correction required. It even had a photo of the path we'd just laid, all fresh and clean, like they were proud of the evidence, like it was some kind of crime scene. I asked her, what the hell is this even supposed to mean? It's a stone path, not a meth lab. She laughed through her tears, but only barely. Said she called the HOA office to ask the same thing. And that's when it got weird. Apparently, the guy who answered the phone, some smug-ass voice named Craig, told her the HOA had a rule that any visible landscape work had to be done by an approved contractor. When she asked for a list, he said there was only one. Just one company, no others allowed. And wouldn't you know it, that one company belonged to his cousin. His freaking cousin. Now listen, I don't live in that neighborhood. I don't pay their dues. I didn't sign their covenant or whatever. But I've worked enough jobs with city permits and county inspectors and HOA reps breathing down my neck to know that this smelled like something rotten. You can't force people to use your cousin's company. That's not policy. That's racketeering with a newsletter. Still, Erin, being Erin, was trying to be polite about it. She said, okay, well, what would it cost to have their guy do the work? And that's when Craig told her the number. $10,000. 10,000. For a job I'd just done with my own 2 hands and a rented Home Depot tamper for under $500. The most insulting part? It wasn't even going to be a new path. They just wanted to tear ours out and redo the same damn thing, but this time with an official logo on the invoice. She asked him, "Why does it have to be your cousin?" He told her straight-faced that it was to ensure consistency and quality control. Yeah, sure, nothing says quality control like charging 20 times the actual value and punishing people who dare use common sense. I told her to forward me everything. Emails, letters, whatever she had. I wanted to see it all. I wasn't even mad at this point. I was interested. You ever get that quiet little itch when you realize something's off and you start tilting your head just a little like a dog hearing a weird sound? That was me. Because this wasn't just a stupid rule. This was someone testing how much bullshit they could get away with. Someone seeing if people were too scared or too tired to push back. And I'll be honest, I don't think Craig expected anyone to say no. Not in that neighborhood. Not when most folks just write checks and hope their grass doesn't get measured. But I'm not most folks. And I sure as hell wasn't about to let Aaron get steamrolled by a guy who thinks nepotism is a management style. So at this point, I figured we were dealing with some garden variety HOA nonsense. Annoying, yeah. Shady as hell, probably, but manageable. Maybe I send a strongly worded email. Maybe Aaron pushes back a little. Maybe we all move on with our lives. Nope. See, Craig wasn't just some bored retiree with a clipboard and a superiority complex. This guy took his little HOA kingdom seriously. Like Game of Thrones, seriously. The kind of guy who probably prints out his own name tags for board meetings and dreams about getting a utility belt with President embroidered across it. The escalation started subtle. First, Aaron got a follow-up letter. Not an email, an actual letter, hand-delivered in a cheap manila envelope like we were back in the Cold War passing secret messages through hotel lobbies. This one said she had 7 days to comply by removing the unapproved modification, or the HOA would begin corrective proceedings. She called Craig again, just trying to understand what that meant. His response? "You'll find out if you don't comply." Yeah, that's what he said. No clarification, no detail, just this smug little threat hanging in the air like a fart in a sauna. We thought maybe he was bluffing. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. 2 days later, some guy with a safety vest and a clipboard showed up in Erin's yard. No logo, no business card, nothing. Just started taking photos. Of her lawn, the walkway, her mailbox, even her car. Erin opened the door and asked who he was, and he said he was conducting a compliance audit on behalf of the HOA. Then he just walked off. Didn't say goodbye, didn't explain anything. Just left like he was satisfied with what he'd seen. That night, Erin got another letter. This one had new violations listed. Apparently, her trash cans had been visible from the street, and the side gate to her backyard was misaligned with HOA visual standards. The kicker? Those things had been the same way since she moved in. No one had ever said a word. I told her straight up it was retaliation. Craig was turning the screws, and we both knew why. It wasn't about the path anymore. It was about control. Erin had challenged the system, even politely, even naively. She'd done the unthinkable, asked questions. And Craig? He didn't like questions. He liked obedience. Then came the meeting. Every few months, the HOA held one of those homeowner meetings in the local library basement or whatever sad windowless room they could get on a Tuesday night. Erin dragged me along, said she didn't want to go alone and that maybe if Craig saw me there, he'd take things more seriously. Spoiler alert number 2, he did not. The meeting was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lighting, weak coffee, and the smell of carpet glue and quiet resentment. Craig stood at the front like a wannabe politician, leaning on a podium like he'd just finished negotiating a peace treaty with North Korea. When Erin raised her hand to ask about the contractor rule, he cut her off before she finished her sentence. Said, "We're not taking questions about enforcement tonight." "That's not on the agenda." I raised my hand too. Then put it on the agenda. I think the homeowners would like to know why only one company is allowed, especially when that company's owned by your cousin. The room went dead quiet. Craig's face didn't even twitch. He just stared at me like he was deciding which one of my limbs he wanted to break first. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "You're not a homeowner here, so I'm afraid you're not authorized to speak." Before I could say a word, some woman in the front row, short, tight perm, gold hoop earrings, the whole suburban general vibe, turned around and whispered, "Thank you for saying it, though." I didn't get a name, but that stuck with me, because in that moment I realized we weren't alone. Erin wasn't the only one getting steamrolled. She was just the only one still standing up. The next day, she got hit with a $250 citation. This one said her walkway was now considered a non-compliant installation requiring demolition. Not optional, requiring. Oh, and there was a deadline. And if she didn't comply, the HOA said they'd arrange removal and bill her accordingly. They were threatening to tear up her property and charge her for it. That's when it stopped being petty. That's when I got mad. Not annoyed, not irritated. Madam. Because this wasn't about order or safety or whatever buzzword Craig had pasted onto the last letter. This was about power and intimidation. And it wasn't just Erin's walkway anymore. It was her house, her independence, her right to not be strong-armed by a man with a cousin in concrete and a god complex. And I'll tell you right now, I wasn't about to let them bring a bulldozer to a place where we'd just built something solid, not without a fight. We weren't looking to burn the place down. Not yet. I mean, Erin still had to live there. Her kid still had to ride his bike past these people, and I wasn't about to go nuclear without at least trying to handle it the adult way first. So we tried. God, did we try. Erin started by emailing the HOA board directly. Not just Craig, but the full list. The treasurer, the secretary, even the community events person. She laid it all out. The path was safe, clean, professionally installed by someone with experience. It didn't violate any of the published architectural guidelines she had on file. She even attached pictures from before and after, just to show how much better the place looked. You'd think that kind of initiative would get her a thank you card. No one responded. Not a single word. The only thing that came in was a generic reply from some no-name email account saying her message had been received and documented. So then we tried calling. She got put on hold for over 20 minutes before someone picked up, and even then it was some poor kid who sounded like he was working the phones from a folding chair in someone's garage. He said he wasn't authorized to answer questions about compliance matters. When she asked who was authorized, he just repeated that same line like he was reading it off a cue card. Next, we tried looking up the HOA bylaws, like the real ones. The ones filed with the state, not just the glossy welcome packet they hand out with coupons for dog poop bags and frozen yogurt discounts. That was an adventure in itself. Took us 3 different websites and a few hours digging through PDFs written in the kind of legalese that makes your brain leak out your ears. But we found what we needed. And wouldn't you know it, nowhere in the governing documents did it say work had to be done by a specific contractor. It said it had to be professionally installed and aesthetically consistent with community design, which if anything helped our case. Because if Craig's cousin's overpriced nonsense was the aesthetic benchmark, then Erin's new path was practically award-winning. Armed with that, she wrote a formal appeal, sent it by certified mail, included photos, documentation, and a detailed breakdown of the installation. She even cited page numbers in the bylaws, like she was defending a college thesis. A week later, she got a letter back. It wasn't signed by anyone. It was typed, generic, and basically said, "The board has reviewed your case and determined the violation stands." That's it. No explanation, no meeting, no signatures, no appeal process. Just bam, case closed. At this point, I told her we needed to lawyer up, not sue, just get someone with a few letters after their name to write a firm, scary letter. Something that said, "We know our rights and we know when you're full of shit." She didn't love the idea. She was already stretched thin financially, and the idea of paying a lawyer just to send a letter didn't sit right with her. But she agreed to at least talk to someone. So we called around and finally found a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. He offered a free consult. We showed up at his office, handed over the stack of letters, fines, bylaws, all of it. He skimmed through the pile, made a few notes, then leaned back in his chair with this look on his face like someone just served him cold soup at a steakhouse. "Well," he said, "this smells like self-dealing." I didn't know the term at the time, but Erin nodded like she'd heard it before. Turns out it means exactly what it sounds like, someone using their position to benefit themselves or their family financially, which is a big, fat, shiny no-no, even in the twisted world of HOA bylaws. The attorney said we had a solid case, but warned us, if you want to sue the HOA, you're technically suing yourself. You're a homeowner here. That means legal costs might come out of your own dues. It's messed up, but it happens. We left the office more informed, but completely deflated. She was stuck. She couldn't afford to fight them in court, but if she didn't, they'd keep piling on the fines until she either gave in or they found a legal loophole to slap a lien on her house. That's when she said something that stuck with me. "I don't have the energy to keep pushing." It broke something in me hearing that. Erin's one of the toughest people I know. She's been through divorce, hospital shifts that would make most people break down crying, raising a kid mostly on her own. And now? Now she was ready to surrender because a bunch of suburban tyrants in pastel polos decided her walkway wasn't HOA enough? Nah, screw that. She might not have had the energy, but I still did. I wasn't sleeping much at that point. Something about the whole situation just wouldn't let go of me. I'd lie in bed thinking about Craig, about how smug his voice sounded on that recording Erin secretly made when she called the HOA line again, about how casually he'd said, "It's all in the rules," like the rules were written by God and handed down in stone tablets, with his cousin's business card stapled to the back. But one night, I just snapped. I got out of bed, poured some coffee I didn't even want, and opened my laptop. If they were going to keep hiding behind their rules, fine. I was going to read every damn one of them. I went deep. I'm talking late-night forums, archived newsletters, county property records, the kind of digital rabbit hole that makes your eyes burn and your cursor start shaking like it's mad at you. And that's when I found it. Buried on the county clerk's website, some dusty PDF labeled Articles of Association Sunrise Ridge HOA with a date stamp from a decade ago. The original filing with handwritten amendments scanned in, some of them crooked like they'd been fed through a dying fax machine. It wasn't easy reading, but one page caught my eye. It was a clause, section 4.3.2 if you can believe it, that listed the rules for vendor approval, not just the summary version they'd stuck in the welcome packet, but the real thing. According to that clause, the HOA must maintain a list of at least 3 qualified contractors for every category of work. No single provider monopolies allowed, and any update to the list requires a homeowner vote with a quorum of 51% participating. I stared at the screen, just blinking. Erin had never gotten a vote. None of the neighbors we talked to had ever gotten a vote. Most of them didn't even know there was a contractor list, let alone a process to change it. And when we asked for a copy of the list earlier, Craig's response had been, "There's only one." That's the standard. That's when it hit me like a brick to the face. There was no vote. There were no 3 contractors. There wasn't even a list. There was just one guy, Craig's cousin, who'd been handed a monopoly with no oversight, no vote, no accountability. And somehow they'd gotten away with it for years. No one asked questions, no one checked the paperwork, and anyone who did, well, they either gave up or moved out. And just as I was processing that, I remembered something Erin told me at the meeting. A woman had thanked us, whispered it, like she was scared to speak out loud. So I went back to Erin's place and knocked on her neighbor's door. The older guy, Jerry, the one who helped us haul stones that day. He let me in, poured me this terrible instant coffee, and listened while I laid everything out. When I got to the part about the 3-vendor rule, he didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, like something clicked into place in his own head. Then he got up, went into the other room, and came back with a thick yellow folder. "Don't tell my wife I still have this," he said. Inside were old HOA meeting minutes, like actual printed records from years back, before they went digital, and tucked between 2 pages from 5 years ago, there it was. A draft of a motion. A proposal to streamline vendor management for landscape-related improvements by designating a single preferred contractor to handle all compliance-related work. And guess what? That motion was never passed. It was tabled, never finalized, never voted on. But Craig had started enforcing it anyway. Right then, I knew we had him. This wasn't a difference of opinion. This wasn't a miscommunication or an outdated rule. This was a lie. A real one. Documented, traceable, stupidly bold, and now exposed. That single discovery flipped the whole game board. Because now it wasn't just about a walkway. It wasn't just about Erin. It was about every homeowner in that neighborhood who'd been tricked, overcharged, and steamrolled into silence. And now that we had proof, we were done playing nice. The funny thing about finding a crack in the wall is that once you see it, you can't stop looking. And once you find one, you start wondering how many more are hiding just beneath the paint. I left Jerry's place with that yellow folder under my arm like it was a stolen artifact. I didn't even know exactly what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. We weren't on defense anymore. I showed it to Erin the next day. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the motion that was never passed, the bylaws that were never followed, and the highlighted parts I'd marked like some crazed conspiracy theorist with a highlighter and a grudge. She didn't say anything at first, just kept flipping back and forth between the pages, slow, deliberate. And then finally she looked up and said, "So now what?" Honestly, I didn't know, but I had ideas, and a lot of anger. First, we needed more than just us. We needed people, witnesses, allies, anyone who'd had a run-in with Craig or his cousin or the HOA's magical vanishing contractor list. I figured if Craig had pulled this kind of stunt on Erin, he'd done it to others. Probably lots of others. We just had to find them. I started knocking on doors, literally, like some bootleg HOA investigator with a clipboard and no official title. Most people were cautious. A few looked at me like I was selling timeshares, but once I explained what was going on, really explained it, something changed in their faces. Turns out Craig had a pattern. There was the single mom down the block who got fined for repainting her shutters without pre-approval, even though they matched the original color. The older couple who were forced to replace a fence that was only 2 inches too tall and had to use, you guessed it, Craig's cousin's company. And the guy on the corner lot who paid almost $8,000 for a retaining wall that started leaning after the first rain. All of them had been told the same thing. That's the rule. None of them had ever voted on anything, and none of them knew they should have. The more I talked to people, the more pissed off I got. This wasn't just a money grab. This was a full-blown operation. They had a system. They'd weaponized bureaucracy and used it to bleed people dry while hiding behind procedure and a fake sense of order. So I got serious. I built a folder, digital this time, scans of the old meeting notes, screenshots of bylaws, testimonies from neighbors who were willing to talk, a full write-up of Aaron's situation from start to finish. I even recorded a walkthrough of the path I'd built, pointing out every single detail, every code it complied with, every reason their fine was bogus. And then I reached out to someone who could actually do something about it. Bev Howard. Bev had been on the HOA board years ago. She was retired now, gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who says, "bless your heart," and then dismantles your entire argument in one breath. Aaron knew her from around the neighborhood, said she used to be a real estate attorney before she gave up fighting with idiots for a living. I figured she might still have a little fire left. She did. I gave her the folder. She read through it in dead silence, front to back, while her cat sat on the table and glared at me like I'd knocked over its bowl. When she was done, she didn't say much. Just poured herself a glass of boxed wine, took a long sip, and said, "This'll be fun." She was in. Bev told us exactly what we needed to do next. File a formal demand for internal financial records. Under HOA law in our state, any homeowner can request financial transparency, especially if there's suspicion of fraud or misconduct. And if they ignore the request, that opens the door for escalation, real escalation, legal complaints, state-level attention, maybe even a civil investigation. But she didn't stop there. She helped Aaron draft a motion to call a special homeowner meeting. It would need a certain number of signatures to trigger, technically 20% of the total homeowners, but Bev already knew the numbers, said with a few persuasive conversations and a little door-to-door, we could make it happen. So we made a plan, a real one. Aaron would be the face. She was a homeowner, she had standing, and people liked her. She wasn't threatening, which helped. I'd handle the paperwork, the digging, the connecting of dots. Bev would handle the legal language and make sure every letter we sent hit where it hurt. And just in case all of that wasn't enough, I emailed a copy of our little folder to a local news tip line. Just a quiet, in case you're interested kind of thing. I didn't know if anyone would care. But I knew this. Craig had built his little empire on the assumption that no one would ever look too closely. We were about to change that. We kicked things off quiet. No drama, no yelling, no cardboard signs on the lawn, just the right documents in the right hands, sent by certified mail with signatures to prove they'd been received. The first letter was a formal request for access to financial records, vendor contracts, payment logs, maintenance agreements, the whole 9 yards. Aaron signed it, Bev double-checked the language, and I walked it down to the little HOA Dropbox myself. Just to be sure, they ignored it. No surprise there, they had 2 weeks to respond. On the 15th day, nothing, not even a denial, just a whole lot of nothing, which was perfect, really, because Bev was ready with step 2. We sent a second letter, this one warning that a formal complaint was being prepared for the state's Department of Commerce and Community Affairs. It was real, legal, and backed by statute. We weren't bluffing, and Bev made sure Craig would know that. That's when things started happening. Fast. First, Aaron got a visit from the so-called property standards officer. Not a real job, mind you, just a volunteer from the HOA board who looked like he'd rather be playing golf, but instead was now poking around Aaron's front yard with a clipboard and a camera. He started pointing at the mailbox, the roofline, the space between the pavers like he was grading a crime scene. Aaron asked what he was doing. "Routine inspection," he said. She told him to leave. He didn't. I was already halfway there when she called me. By the time I pulled up, the guy was leaning against his car, still writing notes. I didn't yell. I didn't touch him. I just walked right up and said, "You're trespassing. Leave." He didn't argue. He got in the car and drove off. The next day, Aaron got a new violation notice in her mailbox. The font was bold this time, like that made it more official. This one said her trash bin was left out too long after pickup and threatened an additional fine. It was petty, transparent, desperate, but they weren't done. A few days later, Bev got a phone call from an HOA board member, not Craig, but someone else, a woman named Rita who handled community engagement. She tried to play it casual, like she was calling to clarify some misunderstandings and talk things through neighbor to neighbor. Bev let her ramble for a while, then calmly told her the call was being recorded and anything further should be submitted in writing. Click. Then came the flyer. Printed in cheap black and white, stuffed into mailboxes around the neighborhood. It looked official at a glance. Same font the HOA uses, same layout, but it wasn't signed. No letterhead, just a bunch of vague warnings about misinformation being spread by individuals with personal agendas, and how the HOA was committed to maintaining standards despite recent unrest. Unrest. They made it sound like Aaron had started a riot with a trowel and some pavers. Honestly, I would have laughed if it wasn't so sleazy, but we didn't stop. Aaron and I kept knocking on doors, kept telling people what was going on. Most of them were quiet at first, but you could see it, some mix of relief and recognition in their faces, like they'd been waiting for someone to finally call it out. And then one night, the whole game shifted. Local news called back. That little folder I'd sent. Someone read it. They wanted an interview. Nothing huge, just a segment for their Your Town, Your Voice series, but it was something. We met them at Erin's house. She was nervous, but she held it together like a champ. Spoke calmly, clearly, laid out what happened without any dramatics. I stood off camera, watching from the porch, while a guy with a mic pack asked her questions about fines, favoritism, vendor kickbacks. The segment aired 2 nights later. You'd think it would have caused a ripple. It caused a wave. The morning after it aired, 3 more homeowners emailed Bev asking how they could help. One of them had paperwork, actual invoices from Craig's cousin's company showing grossly inflated prices. Another had proof of a contractor being denied approval to work in the neighborhood, despite meeting every listed requirement. A third neighbor said she tried to report Craig's conduct to the board last year and was told she'd misunderstood the process. Suddenly, we weren't just pushing back. We were dragging the whole thing into the light. Bev filed the formal complaint with the state. We posted notice of the upcoming special meeting on every community board in the neighborhood. Aaron walked the entire block and slipped printed invitations into mailboxes. Again, totally legal, Bev made sure. A dozen homeowners RSVP'd that same day. Craig must have known it was slipping. He didn't respond to anything directly, but he started showing up more. Walking around the neighborhood, talking to people, trying to play politician. I even caught him waving at Trevor one day like they were buddies. Too little, too late. The plan was in motion, and this time we were steering the ship. The night of the special meeting felt different from the start. There was this quiet tension in the air, like the whole neighborhood had collectively realized they'd been swallowing something rotten and were finally ready to spit it out. They held it in the community rec room, a place that usually smelled like old cookies and Febreze, with folding chairs that creaked if you breathed too hard. Aaron stood near the entrance, greeting people as they walked in, clutching a clipboard like it was a security blanket. She was nervous, but you wouldn't know it unless you really knew her. She wore that tight, polite smile that nurses put on when they're about to deliver bad news gently. Bev was already seated front and center with a manila folder in her lap and that look in her eye, focused, calm, like she was about to cross-examine someone into an early grave. I sat in the back at first, just watching people file in. People we'd talked to, people we hadn't. Some looked mad, others curious. A few probably had no idea what they were walking into, and then Craig showed up. Khakis, polo shirt, clipboard of his own. He walked in like he still owned the room, head high, chin out, the whole routine. Gave a couple tight nods to board members, ignored everyone else. He made a beeline for the front, where the board table had been set up with some bottled water and a nameplate that said President, like this was Congress or something. The second he sat down, the room started shifting. People quieted. Some stood along the walls. One woman had a notepad. Another had her phone out, already recording. Craig cleared his throat and opened with his usual line about calling the meeting to order, but before he could launch into his prepared speech, Bev stood up. She didn't raise her voice, didn't get emotional, she just started reading. She read the section of the bylaws that required multiple approved vendors. She read the clause about homeowner votes being required for policy changes. Then she read the motion from years ago, the one Craig tried to implement without a vote. Then she asked one simple question. Can you show us the vote that approved your cousin's company as the sole provider? The room was dead silent. Craig blinked, cleared his throat again, said, "That was handled by a prior board." Bev cut him off. "You've been president for 6 years. This motion was never voted on. The change was never ratified. Yet you've enforced it as if it were law." He tried to pivot, said something about ensuring consistency and protecting property values. But people weren't buying it anymore. Not after the news story, not after the fines, not after watching their neighbors get railroaded one by one. That's when Erin stood up. She held up a photo of the path I helped her build and said, "This is the work I got fined for." Then she held up the quote from Craig's cousin, 10 grand, for the same exact job. This wasn't about standards, she said. This was about money. Craig opened his mouth, but no words came out. And then, like some divine bit of comedic timing, a woman in the second row raised her hand and said, "I'd like to motion for a vote of no confidence in the current board." Bev smiled. 2 more people stood up and said, "Seconded." What followed wasn't a riot, it wasn't loud, it was surgical. Neighbors started telling their stories, the guy with the fence, the woman with the shutters. Jerry stood up and flat out said Craig tried to charge him triple for a drainage issue that didn't exist. It was like pulling a plug on a dam. Everything came out. Craig tried to push back, said we weren't following procedure, that this wasn't an authorized vote, that we were creating division. But at that point, it didn't matter. His words had no weight anymore. The room had turned. Someone from the back, one of the quiet ones, asked, "Can we see the financial records?" Dead silence again. Craig didn't answer, so Bev did. She held up the formal complaint she'd already filed with the state, said an investigation was pending, said the Attorney General's office had acknowledged receipt. You could hear the air go out of Craig's lungs. He stood up, said something about needing to consult legal counsel, and walked out of the room. Just like that. The rest of the board followed, some looking at the floor, others just gone. And the homeowners, they didn't cheer, they didn't boo, they just sat there quietly absorbing the weight of what they'd just done. No fireworks, no confetti, but make no mistake, it was a win, a real one. And for the first time in a long while, Aaron smiled without that tightness behind it. Things didn't change overnight, of course. That's not how neighborhoods, or people, work. The state did end up opening an investigation. Aaron got a letter from the Attorney General's office a couple weeks later, confirming they'd received the complaint and were looking into potential misuse of authority and procedural violations by the HOA board, which, if you've ever dealt with state-level bureaucracy, is the equivalent of a SWAT team kicking down your paperwork's front door. Craig disappeared after that. No big farewell email, no final power move. Just gone. Resigned for personal reasons, according to the brief note that showed up on the HOA website a few days later. His cousin's company vanished just as quietly. One moment they were the exclusive provider for HOA-compliant work, and the next, their phone number was disconnected and their website redirected to a park domain full of ads for prescription sunglasses and crypto scams. Bev ended up on the board again, which honestly felt like justice in the most peaceful form. The next meeting had more people show up than the previous 5 combined. Folks brought their own copies of the bylaws. A few even showed up with highlighted sections. That had never happened before. Aaron's fines were voided. No more letters, no more fake violations, no more guys with clipboards lurking around the bushes pretending to be inspectors. Just silence. Good silence. One afternoon, I was back at her place, just dropping off a bag of mulch she'd asked for, nothing major. Trevor was in the driveway riding his bike in circles and talking to himself like he was narrating a stunt show. Aaron came out with 2 beers, handed me one, and we sat on the porch looking at that walkway. It looked exactly the same, but somehow, it didn't. She said, "It's funny. For a while, I was afraid to even look at it. Like if I saw it, I'd think of that stupid fine again." And I said, "Now it's just stone." She smiled. Number. Now it's mine. We didn't say much after that. Didn't need to. The sun was setting, the air smelled like fresh grass and someone grilling down the block, and the world, for just a second, felt okay. And me? I never expected to go toe-to-toe with a petty suburban tyrant over a patch of slate and sand. But I gotta say, standing there next to Erin, watching her finally be at peace in her own damn yard, it felt good. It felt earned. And if that walkway ever cracks, you can bet I'll be back with my gloves on. Not because I owe her, not because it's my job, just because some things are worth fixing, especially when they're built right the first time.